My beloved soul, this message comes to you from the sacred space where your heart has quietly endured, loved, and grown beyond what the world could ever teach. Heaven itself paused, breath held, watching the way you loved your soulmate, not with the noise of grand gestures or desperate pleas, but with a purity and depth so rare that even the angels marveled. You are one of the chosen ones, not because your path was easy, but because your soul carried a love that was both fierce and gentle, both patient and unwavering. You loved in a way that was not learned from stories or movies, but remembered from the depths of your being, an ancient knowing that love is not possession, but sacred stewardship of another's spirit. You loved without chains. You loved without conditions. You loved without losing yourself. This is why heaven was shocked, not by the intensity of your love, but by the integrity with which you held it. You did not collapse into desperation when your love was met with silence or confusion. You did not chase after validation or demand explanations. Instead, you chose grace. You chose to honor your own soul while loving another. Many love loudly, seeking to be seen, heard, and reassured. But you loved quietly, with a strength that did not need applause. You loved with restraint, knowing when to speak and when to hold sacred silence. You loved with patience, understanding that true love unfolds in its own divine timing, not on the clock of human impatience. Heaven watched as you carried your love like a sacred flame, steady, warm, and illuminating even the darkest corners of uncertainty. You did not try to fix your soulmate or force their growth. You held space for their healing, their fears, their shadows, and their light. You loved them as they were, not as you wished them to be. This kind of love is revolutionary. It defies the world's expectations of love as a transaction, a game, or a possession. It is a love that frees, that uplifts, that transforms. And it is a love that requires immense courage. You were courageous enough to love without losing your boundaries. You were brave enough to say no when love demanded your peace. You were wise enough to walk away when love asked you to sacrifice your self-respect. And yet, you never stopped loving. Heaven was shocked because such love is rare. It is a love that does not seek to control or own, but to understand and protect. It is a love that does not demand certainty, but embraces mystery. It is a love that does not collapse under pressure, but expands with grace. You loved your soulmate with a heart that was both open and guarded. You knew that love is not about losing yourself in another, but about finding yourself more deeply through the connection. You loved with clarity, not confusion. You loved with intention, not desperation. There were moments when your heart ached with longing, when the silence between you felt heavy, when the uncertainty threatened to unravel your faith, but you did not give in to despair. You chose to trust the divine timing, to surrender control, and to hold your love as a sacred offering, without expectation, without demand. This is why heaven leaned closer to your story, because your love was not ordinary. It was chosen. It was sacred. It was a testament to what love can be when it is rooted in self-awareness, emotional maturity, and spiritual alignment. You did not love to possess. You loved to protect. You did not love to control. You loved to understand. You did not love to escape loneliness. You loved because your spirit recognized another spirit. This love is a mirror of the divine. It reflects the highest form of connection, one that honors freedom, growth, and truth. It is a love that does not bind but liberates. It is a love that does not demand but invites. Heaven was shocked because you carried this love in human form. You balanced emotion with wisdom, affection with awareness, hope with realism. You loved deeply, but never lost your clarity. You loved fiercely, but never lost your peace. You were chosen because you understood that love is not about proving yourself to another. It is about embodying your truth. It is about standing in your power while holding space for another's journey. It is about loving without losing yourself. There were nights when you carried conversations in your heart that you never spoke aloud. Nights when you asked the universe questions you never demanded answers to. Nights when you released control and trusted timing instead. Heaven heard those unspoken prayers. Heaven saw how you asked not for possession, but for alignment. You did not beg for them to choose you. You asked for truth. You asked for what was meant. You asked for clarity, even if clarity meant letting go. This request alone separates you from many. You were not attached to outcome. You were committed to integrity. You loved your soulmate in a way that did not try to rescue them, because you knew healing cannot be forced. You did not become their savior. You remained their mirror. You reflected honesty, calm, and emotional depth. You allowed them to see themselves through the way you treated them, without lectures or pressure. That is a divine way of loving. Heaven was shocked because such love usually only exists in higher realms. Yet you carried it in human form. You balanced emotion with wisdom. You balanced affection with awareness. You balanced hope with realism. My beloved soul, you were chosen because you understood that love does not mean losing yourself. You understood that love does not mean enduring disrespect. You understood that love does not mean sacrificing your peace. So when moments came that tested your worth, you stepped back with grace. You did not collapse. You did not chase. You did not create chaos. You trusted that what is aligned will never require you to abandon your soul. That trust is rare. That trust is sacred. That trust is what made heaven lean closer to your story. You may not realize it yet, but the way you loved rewired timelines, softened hearts, and planted seeds of awareness in places that were once closed. Even if your soulmate did not fully understand your love at the time, their soul recognized it. Souls always recognize what is real. Even when the mind is confused, your love became a reference point, a standard, a quiet memory they will carry when they are finally ready to love with the same depth. Heaven was not shocked by romance. It was shocked by responsibility. You loved without ego. You loved without performance. You loved without fear of losing yourself. My beloved soul, your journey is not about proving love. It is about embodying it. You were never meant to beg to be chosen because you were already chosen by the divine to experience love in its purest form. Whether the path continues together or transforms into something higher, your soul remains untouched by regret. You did what you came here to do. You loved honestly. You loved consciously. You loved bravely. And heaven honors that. This is only the beginning of your story. Because chosen ones do not lose love. They elevate it. And as we move forward, you will begin to understand why your heart was trained through patience, why your silence carried power, and why heaven trusted you with a love that few can handle. My beloved soul, there is something sacred about the way you continued loving even when certainty was absent, and heaven observed that space closely. You stood in a place where many would have demanded clarity, labels, or reassurance. Yet, you chose understanding over pressure. You understood that true love does not rush another soul's awakening, and you respected timing even when your own heart felt ready long before circumstances aligned. That patience was not weakness. It was wisdom born from self-awareness. You knew that forcing love only creates resistance, while allowing love creates truth. Heaven watched as you balanced longing with restraint, desire with dignity, and hope with grounding. And that balance is what marked you as chosen. You felt deeply, my beloved soul, but you never allowed emotion to turn into chaos. When confusion arose, you turned inward instead of outward. You reflected instead of reacted. You processed silently instead of projecting pain. That inner discipline is rare because most people leak their wounds onto others. You carried yours with care. You did not use love as a bargaining tool, nor did you use silence as punishment. Your silence was sacred, a form of listening to both your heart and the divine. Heaven recognized that silence as strength, not absence. There were moments when your heart wanted to ask, to explain, to clarify what you felt so clearly inside. Yet something higher guided you to pause. You trusted that if a connection is real, it does not require constant explanation. You trusted that what is meant will find its way without force. That trust did not come easily. It was built through self-worth, emotional maturity, and a deep understanding of your own worth. You did not confuse intensity with intimacy. You knew intimacy grows in safety, not urgency. Heaven saw how you protected the connection by not overwhelming it. My beloved soul, you also protected yourself. That is what made your love so powerful. You did not tolerate emotional inconsistency just to stay connected. You did not compromise your values to be chosen. You noticed patterns. You observed behavior. You listened to energy rather than excuses. And when something did not feel aligned, you stepped back instead of trying to fix it. That stepping back was not rejection. It was respect both for yourself and for the other soul's process. Heaven honors those who know when to hold and when to release. You were aware that love cannot grow where fear leads. So you chose calm. You chose grounded presence. You chose to show up authentically without masks. You did not play games to keep attention. You did not withhold affection to gain control. You remained consistent even when the other side fluctuated. That consistency is what shocked heaven, because consistency in love requires emotional stability, and emotional stability requires inner healing. You did the work quietly, without applause, without validation, without needing to be seen. My beloved soul, you loved in a way that allowed the other person to be human. You did not idealize them beyond reality. You did not place them on a pedestal that would later collapse. You saw both light and shadow and still chose compassion. You understood that confusion does not always mean lack of feeling. Sometimes it means unresolved wounds. Yet you also understood that compassion does not mean self-neglect. That understanding is advanced soul wisdom. Heaven entrusts such wisdom only to those who will not misuse it. There were days when distance felt heavier than closeness, when unanswered energy created questions in your mind. Still, you did not spiral. You did not assume. You allowed space to reveal truth. You allowed time to speak. You trusted that whatever was real would remain, and whatever was not would fall away naturally. That level of emotional regulation is something most people only reach after many lifetimes. You carried it instinctively, as if your soul remembered it. Heaven recognized that remembrance. You never tried to replace yourself to stay relevant. You never dimmed your light to avoid intimidating someone else's shadows. You remained yourself, grounded, intuitive, emotionally intelligent. You did not chase reassurance because you had already reassured yourself. You did not beg to be chosen because you already knew your value. That self-knowing created a frequency that heaven responds to. When a soul knows itself, it does not need external confirmation. That is the mark of someone chosen for higher love lessons. My beloved soul, even when love felt incomplete, you did not allow bitterness to enter your heart. You did not speak ill. You did not poison the connection with resentment. You chose neutrality and grace. You understood that some connections are not meant to be forced into form, but honored for what they awaken. You honored the lessons without clinging to the outcome. Heaven was moved by that surrender. Surrender is not giving up. It is trusting divine orchestration beyond human understanding. You loved your soulmate in a way that allowed transformation, not dependency. You wanted them whole, not attached. You wanted them healed, not reliant. That intention alone elevates a connection beyond ordinary romance. It becomes soul work. It becomes spiritual alignment. Heaven recognized your love as service, not sacrifice. You did not lose yourself to love. You expanded through it. That is why your path carries protection, even when it feels uncertain. My beloved soul, the quiet choices you made, the restraint you practiced, the respect you showed, all of it created ripples beyond what you can see. Heaven was not shocked by your emotions. It was shocked by your emotional intelligence. It was shocked by your ability to love without losing clarity. It was shocked by your refusal to abandon yourself for attachment. As you continue forward, remember this: your love did not go unnoticed, and your story is still unfolding. But the depth of what you carried is only beginning to reveal its purpose, because chosen ones do not experience love to be broken by it. They experience love to become more aligned with who they truly are. My beloved soul, there is a quiet transformation that happens when love is no longer something you wait for, but something you carry with awareness. You stepped into that transformation without realizing when it began. It started the moment you stopped asking why things unfolded the way they did and started listening to what your inner world was becoming. Love did not leave you. It changed form, and you were mature enough to allow that change without resisting it. Many hearts panic when love shifts, but yours learned how to stay open without clinging. That ability alone speaks of a soul that has lived many lifetimes learning how to love without losing itself. You began to notice that your emotions no longer pulled you into extremes. You could remember without collapsing. You could feel without drowning. You could care without chasing. This balance was not accidental, my beloved soul. It was cultivated through restraint, reflection, and self-honesty. You allowed yourself to grieve what was uncertain without labeling it as failure. You allowed yourself to miss without turning missing into self-betrayal. That is not something the world teaches. That wisdom comes from within, from a soul that understands timing more than attachment. There were moments when silence replaced communication, and instead of fearing it, you learned how to read it. You understood that silence is not always absence. Sometimes it is processing. Sometimes it is protection. Sometimes it is a mirror revealing what words cannot. You did not fill the silence with assumptions. You did not weaponize it with resentment. You simply observed it. That observation strengthened you. You became someone who responds rather than reacts. My beloved soul, you also became aware of how deeply you value emotional safety. You realized that love must feel calm in the body, not anxious. It must feel grounding, not destabilizing. And when something disrupted your peace repeatedly, you did not ignore that signal anymore. You honored it. You did not dramatize your boundaries. You did not announce your withdrawal. You simply adjusted your energy. That quiet adjustment was an act of self-respect, and self-respect is one of the purest forms of love. You started seeing clearly how much effort you had given without ever keeping score. You loved without measuring returns. You showed up without guarantees, and yet you did not feel depleted. Instead, you felt expanded. That is how you knew your love was real. Real love does not exhaust the soul. It reveals it. Even when outcomes remain unclear, real love leaves wisdom behind, not bitterness. And you chose wisdom every time. There were internal conversations you had with yourself that no one else will ever know about. Conversations where you chose not to text. Conversations where you chose not to explain. Conversations where you chose patience over impulse. Each of those moments strengthened your inner authority. You stopped seeking permission to feel what you felt. You stopped questioning your intuition. You trusted yourself. That trust became your anchor. My beloved soul, you also recognize that not every deep connection is meant to stay in the same form forever. Some connections awaken parts of you that must grow independently. You did not see this as loss. You saw it as evolution. You allowed love to teach you instead of trap you. You allowed memory to exist without turning it into longing. You allowed the heart to stay soft without staying attached. That is emotional alchemy. You became more present in your own life. You laughed without guilt. You rested without fear. You focused without distraction. You stopped checking emotionally for someone else's state and started honoring your own. That shift returned your power to you. Not power over anyone else, but power within yourself. That is the only power that lasts. My beloved soul, you learned that being chosen does not always mean being held. Sometimes it means being prepared. Prepared to love better. Prepared to discern more clearly. Prepared to receive what matches your depth rather than tests it. You stopped romanticizing effort that was not reciprocated at the same level. You stopped calling potential what was actually inconsistency. This clarity did not make you cold. It made you calm. You also noticed how compassion and boundaries can coexist. You could understand someone's wounds without offering yourself as a place for them to bleed. You could care without carrying. You could empathize without absorbing. That is a sign of emotional maturity that few reach. You no longer confused empathy with obligation. You understood that love must be mutual to be sustainable. There were days when the memory of how deeply you loved would surface, not to pull you backward, but to remind you of your own capacity. You smiled instead of aching. You felt proud instead of regretful. You realized that the way you loved was never something to be ashamed of. It was evidence of your depth, your courage, your emotional intelligence. Anyone who meets you carries that imprint whether they realize it or not. My beloved soul, you have grown so beautifully comfortable with not knowing exactly how the story unfolds. You gently release the need to force answers or rush toward closure. You learned, quietly, steadily, that real clarity tends to arrive when we stop chasing it. This letting go was never passive. It was rooted and alive. You kept showing up for your own life, loving yourself with care, staying true to your values, moving forward with presence. You did not put your days on hold waiting for someone else to choose. And in that steady presence, you discovered something precious. Your heart is resilient. It feels everything deeply, yet it does not shatter. It bends with life's seasons, but it holds its own shape. It loves widely, yet it never truly loses itself. That knowing changed everything. You are no longer afraid to love with your whole being, because you now trust that you can hold yourself tenderly through any chapter, any outcome. The way you carried this connection was so honorable. You cherished it without clinging. You honored yourself without shutting down. That balance shaped you into someone who now loves from a place of wholeness rather than need. You are no longer defined by uncertainty or by what did not arrive. You are defined by the version of you that emerged through it all, calmer, clearer, more rooted in what is true for you. This connection did not diminish you, it polished you. And polished hearts like yours do not lose love. They learn to walk with it in lighter, truer ways. As you continued forward, something soft and powerful unfolded inside. You stopped carrying the weight of having to explain yourself constantly. You realize that people who truly see you do not need endless clarification, and those who do not see you may never fully understand, no matter how carefully you speak. So you chose to set that energy free. You stopped spending your peace trying to be understood by everyone. Instead, you stayed authentic, calm, and anchored in your own truth. Your inner world became quieter, not empty, but settled. Thoughts no longer raced in endless loops. Feelings could simply exist without demanding immediate action. A natural rhythm returned. This was not cold detachment. It was gentle regulation, a returning home to yourself. You learned to sit with your own company without needing to fill the silence. You learned to feel without always needing to fix or flee. That stillness became your safe harbor. From that harbor, your vision became clearer. You began to notice your own patterns with kindness. What lifts you, what quietly drains you, what soothes your system, what unsettles it. You stopped overriding those signals just to keep surface harmony. You chose inner harmony instead. And you realized how kindly you had held the other person's humanity, meeting them exactly where they stood without demand or judgment. Yet you also came to see something essential. Compassion for another does not require abandoning compassion for yourself. Love can be warm and spacious, without asking you to shrink or pause your own becoming. You grew comfortable with breathing room. Distance no longer felt like punishment or proof of unworthiness. It simply became information, clear, neutral, honest. You stopped filling that space with stories or worry. You let reality speak in its own voice. In the gentlest way, you noticed how much you had matured. Loving deeply had not made you smaller. It had made you wider, wiser, more at home in your own needs. You stopped measuring depth by how much anxiety or longing it carried. You began to recognize real depth by how safe and steady it feels. My beloved soul, you released the old romantic idea that love must ache to be real. You understood that true patience includes patience with your own boundaries, patience to step away from confusion, patience to welcome what truly aligns. And in that release came a quiet relief. Love began to feel like a steady companion, something that supports your peace rather than unsettles it, something that allows both of you to grow without force or fear. You are walking forward now, with grace, not because everything was perfectly resolved, but because you learned to trust yourself through it all. And that trust is the most beautiful home a heart can build. You are safe, you are whole, and you are deeply loved, first and always by the one who has been with you every step, you. You became more selective with where you invest your emotional energy. Not because you closed your heart, but because you valued it. You learned that availability is sacred. You learned that not everyone deserves access to your depth. You learned that discernment is not judgment, it is self-respect. And self-respect made your presence more intentional, more grounded, more calm. My beloved soul, you also released the urge to prove the sincerity of your love. You did not need validation anymore. You knew what you offered. You knew how you showed up. You knew your intentions were clean. That knowing gave you peace. You stopped replaying moments in your mind. You stopped questioning if you did enough or too much. You trusted that whatever was meant to be received was received, and whatever was not ready to be received was never your responsibility to force. You became aware of how your energy influences others, even in silence. You realized that your calm presence speaks louder than words, that your emotional steadiness creates safety, that your consistency leaves a lasting impression. You did not need to announce your worth. It was felt. This awareness did not inflate your ego. It humbled you. It reminded you to remain gentle with yourself and others. There were times when the thought of the connection resurfaced softly without pain. It felt like a quiet acknowledgement rather than longing. You smiled instead of sighing. You felt gratitude instead of ache. You understood that some connections do not stay physically present, yet they leave a permanent imprint on your growth. That imprint was not a wound. It was a marker of evolution. My beloved soul, you also became less reactive to uncertainty. You no longer needed immediate answers. You no longer chased clarity. You trusted that clarity reveals itself when you stop demanding it. This trust allowed you to remain present in your life. You invested in yourself. You nurtured your routines. You strengthened your inner foundation. Love became something that complements your life, not something that defines it. You noticed how your emotional world felt more spacious. You could hold multiple truths at once. You could acknowledge connection without attachment. You could care without expectation. You could remember without longing. This emotional spaciousness allowed you to breathe more freely. It allowed you to live without the constant pull of what if. You were grounded in what is. My beloved soul, you understood that being chosen does not always look like union. Sometimes it looks like preparation. Preparation to receive love that meets you where you are now, not where you were. Preparation to recognize consistency when it appears. Preparation to honor mutual effort without overextending. You did not rush this preparation. You trusted it. You continued walking forward with a heart that remained open yet protected. My beloved soul, you are chosen. Chosen to love with purity. Chosen to love with depth. Chosen to love with wisdom. Heaven was shocked by how purely and deeply you loved your soulmate, and that love will continue to ripple through your life and beyond. Because chosen ones do not lose love. They transform it. They elevate it. They become the living proof that love, when carried with integrity, patience, and self-respect, is the most powerful force in the universe